go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, double welcome. This is a time of great excitement as you all venture off into this journey and what we call the college process. I'm Lisa Partridge, and I'm pleased to welcome these 5 colleges to our campus who are going to shed some light on the mysteries of the college application, which is not very mysterious at all. That's a myth. So they will help highlight what it is that they see to be important about the different components of the college application. We'll be talking about the early action and early decision types of application programs and give you an understanding of those. And we'll be talking a little bit about the landscape that we find that you're entering into right now. So we will today hear from a representative from UNH, Mr. Craig Dion from University of Denver. Courtney Roach is with us from Trinity in Connecticut. Zoe Carter's with us from Boston University. And Brent Benner has left the sunny Florida for from University of Tampa for Tilton this evening, so So I hear it's one of the few uses his overcoat actually sees. This is a yearly trip to Tilton, so we're helping with that. So we're going to begin with the landscape that you find yourselves in. So Mr. McGann, if you would begin, that'd be great.
Well, thank you and good evening. We're really glad to be here tonight. This is always a fun event to participate in. One, because it's the start of a very exciting process. I know there's oftentimes a lot of anxiety associated with this idea of going off to college. Any new transition produces some amount of anxiety. At the same time, it should be viewed as a very, very exciting opportunity, because the possibilities afforded you in the college years are really enormous, and the possibilities are almost, if not quite, endless. So you should be approaching this process with a great deal of excitement and optimism, because there's great possibilities out there for you. That being said, there's a number of things you have to keep in mind throughout this process, and one of my charges tonight is to really spend a little time at a very high level outlining what some of those challenges and opportunities might be, in a way to help you think more clearly about this process, put things in proper perspective, and most importantly, to give you some discussion topics to have with your family, to have with your teachers here, and most importantly, to have with your college counselors to help guide you through this process, so the process is productive, enjoyable, and as stress-free as it possibly can be. There's going to be some amount of stress, but you can really minimize the stress tremendously just by following with your common sense and relying on the good advice of the people around you. So a couple of things to think about. There's a few constants in this process as we move forward. One is that every year there's a new group of students who are entering this process, beginning to explore what the possibilities are. Ultimately, it starts with you exploring what's important to you as an individual. This is one of these first decisions you'll be responsible for largely by yourself. And it requires you to do it properly, to have a fair degree of awareness and self-awareness and understanding of what values that you hold dear to yourself, what things are important to you, what you hope to accomplish during your college years. This requires getting thought. So that's one of the big challenges of the process. But there are also some things that haven't really changed a lot about this process. There's a lot of technology, certainly, that people talk about, a lot of challenges, a lot of media and social attention to this process. But the reality is, the colleges and universities that are engaged in this process have a couple of very fundamental goals in mind. They want to make sure that they're admitting students who are capable of success at their institution. We hold your future as a very serious responsibility. We don't want to abuse that responsibility. So we want to make decisions that are best for you, the individual student. Colleges also have a responsibility to meet certain goals and expectations for their institutions. And that introduces a level of complexity and uncertainty for the student, because you don't always know sometimes what those goals are. But there's one basic tenet in this process that I encourage you to embrace, and that is, if you're not sure, ask questions. You can ask questions of colleges, you can ask questions of all of us, you can ask questions of your college counselor. We'll help you navigate this process with a great deal more comfort. The other thing I'll share are a few realities that I think are important to acknowledge that may be counterintuitive for some of you, and that is, most importantly, getting into college is a pretty easy thing to do. And that may seem counterintuitive to what you read and what you hear in sort of social and formal discussions, But again, if you look at the data, if you look at the experience of other students who've gone before you, the reality is getting into college is a very easy thing to do. Now, there are a few caveats. You have to remember these caveats very dearly. You have to be honest with yourself. That's the most important caveat. If you're a C student, acknowledge that and find schools that will accept a C student. If you're an A student, you can find colleges that will accept an A student. But that's very important. Understand who you are. A few other things, a few truisms that I think are important to keep in mind. One of the big concerns that I hear a lot of students talk about over the years is they're very concerned about finding the right college, that college that's best for me. The reality is there are a great many colleges that will support you well. You'll be very happy there, you'll be very successful. Finding that right college is a matter of you doing your homework. Your homework is understanding what's important to you, what values do you hold, some of the things I mentioned previously. But it also requires you to do some fundamental research about the institution in question. Much of this research is not going to be objective. So I can tell you college A, B, or C has an economics department, or an English department, or an engineering department. But the question that I can't answer for you, that you have to be able to answer, is will I be happy there? That's a very subjective, very personal, very unique response to come up with. And that takes some time and some effort. And that's where the challenge comes into this process. So this implies, and I think correctly, that there are a variety of schools out there that you'll be equally happy at. And that's important to understand. So ultimately, when you get to the point of applying to 6 or 8 colleges, and hopefully no more than that, you'll be very happy at any one of those colleges and be very pleased to go to any one of those colleges. You shouldn't be focusing just one singular institution. That can be a recipe for frustration, can lead to frustration and disappointment because you may not find exactly what you're looking for. But if you go into this process with a broader mindset, you'll be much better prepared for happiness. The other thing which is important to recognize also is that students are very resilient. So if the possibility exists that maybe you won't apply yourself as much as you probably should to this process. Maybe you won't do as much research. Maybe you won't ask as many questions as you think might be appropriate. But the reality is that you have a very high probability of being happy at the institution that you ultimately select. So that reduces the risk factor, I think, to a great extent. So important to remember that. And the other part of that resilience factor is that colleges have great capacity to accommodate a great many different kinds of kids. So you have a great chance of being happy at the institution you go to. The other thing that's going to be challenging for you in this landscape of college admissions is there's a tremendous amount of clutter. There's a tremendous amount of information out there that can be very distracting and offer very little value to the actual process itself of selecting an institution. And one of your challenges, and I think that your college counselors are going to be instrumental in helping you manage this process, is understanding which sources of information are valid and which are not. There's a tremendous number of sources of information on the internet, in our social circles, in the broader media that are frankly useless to this process. You have to be very selective in how you interpret information. That's one of the biggest challenges of the internet age, is how do you discern between useful pieces of information and less useful pieces of information. So again, your job is to try and sort through this, and with the help of your college counselors, you'll be able to do that. So try to find, as a sort of a guiding principle of this process, to help you understand the landscape, try to find a few trusted sources of information. And the trusted sources of information may not necessarily be that first piece of information you come across. Now, turn my attention to a bit to some of the admissions landscape, some things to think about. There are a number of larger forces at play that are going to be important for you to just be aware of. I'm not suggesting you have to understand these forces in great detail. You really don't. This is an individual process that affects you, the individual student, and what's happening in the broader landscape may not be worth your while to delve into too greatly, but it is helpful to be aware of. So, for example, in the northeastern part of the United States, there are fewer and fewer high school graduates. That creates more opportunity for you. This is true for many, but not all institutions, and we'll touch upon that in a second. Part of the reality is that the number and percent of kids going off to college tends to be fairly consistent from year to year, and that does create more opportunity for the individual student if they're looking at schools in a proper context. And frankly, there are more and more applications being submitted by a fewer number of students each year, which makes it very challenging for both students and colleges to figure out what the right match and what the right circumstances are for you. So I would encourage you to think very carefully about how many schools you apply to. You're going to get good advice here about the number of schools to apply to. If you think applying to 10 or 15 schools is a good idea, I suggest you have another conversation with your school counselor. They can help you determine what the right number is for you. Part of this process, in terms of not thinking too much about the landscape, is to remember this process is about you. So think about what's important to you first and foremost. Ultimately, the choice you make is going to be a reflection of your values, your interests, your expectations, your aspirations. It's not about me, it's not about your parents, it's not about your teachers, it's about you. So spend a lot of time thinking about what really matters to you in this process, and let that be the driving force in how you approach it. But a few key points to remember, because I know a lot of you are thinking about some of the more popular institutions in this country, and sometimes the more popular institutions in this country equate to the most selective. The reality is that there are a great many institutions to consider, and you have to be very honest about that and look at what the salient points are about the institutions that you're looking at, and why are you looking at it? What triggers you to put a school on your list, and what's going to make that school a good match for you? Most, even despite the decline in number of students, most highly selected institutions in this country are going to remain highly selected. So as you plan your process, you have to be very well aware of that. So highly selected institutions that accept a very small percentage of students are still going to continue to accept a very small percentage of students, which does mean that a great many very capable, very talented, very bright people are not going to get into those institutions. It's not a reflection on your abilities or your accomplishments. It's a reflection of available space. So when you're planning, you have to acknowledge that reality and understand that in this country, with over 3,000 institutions to consider, the number of wonderful, fantastic educational opportunities far exceeds the number of highly selected institutions in this country. So you can get a tremendous quality of education with great opportunities at places you probably haven't heard of at this moment in time. And that's one of the exciting things about this process, is the opportunity for you to explore and discover new, exciting possibilities. In doing that, in terms of exploring these new and exciting possibilities, the landscape of higher ed sort of requires you to think about what are the key things that you're hoping to accomplish during your college years. So what are the educational outcomes that you hope to achieve? And that's really the primary driver in what you should be thinking about when you look at college. And educational outcomes means a lot of different things to different people. It certainly means what happens in the classroom, but it also means what happens outside the classroom, co-curricular experiences, what's happening extracurricularly, what's happening socially and culturally on these college campuses. These are the sort of variables that matter in terms of your educational experience and can lead you directly to having tremendous academic experiences that create the great foundation that's going to set you up very well for that first job or career, but also graduate school and other possibilities that await you upon graduation from college. So again, you do have to look at this process much more comprehensively than just a simple admit rate or SAT score, because those inputs have very little to do with the quality of the education that you're going to receive at an institution once you start your classwork at those institutions. So be open-minded about this process. Think about the possibilities you have to consider here. Think about interesting areas of the country that you might want to consider going to college. Think about what responsibility you have for creating your own educational success. So measures of quality are many, and I think one of the key measures of quality that we want you to think about in this process are not the inputs, not the average SAT, not the average GPA, not the accept rate. Those are not measures of quality. Measures of quality are outcomes. What happens to the students once they're at those institutions? What are the graduation rates like? What are the retention rates like? How do people grow and change during their time at that institution? These are things that you can readily learn about by simply asking, but can help lead you to a more reliable and satisfactory decision. Let me turn my attention now for a few minutes to financial aid. Now is the time to be thinking about cost issues. Cost is a very important component to selecting a college to go to. It's very important for families to have conversations, maybe moderated and guided by school college counselors here at Tilton, to help you understand what the implications of choices are. It's a very different higher ed landscape than it was 30 or 40 years ago, 25, 30, 40 years ago, when many parents and grandparents were in college. The reality is college is a very expensive proposition. So families have to take seriously the responsibility of identifying reasonable and reliable financial choices that are going to help us to be successful. Cost is a real issue to consider. It shouldn't be the only issue. And your college counselors can help identify how this process works. Where students go to college with regard to money is going to be a reflection of the student and family's values and expectations regarding money and borrowing. Because one of the realities is that most families, not all, but most families are going to have to engage in some amount of borrowing to pay for college expenses. So it's important to have these conversations early so that the list of schools that the college counselors can assemble is going to be realistic and going to reflect your family's values and resources as it pertains to money. A couple of things just to be aware of. You'll hear some terms that I'll just put out tonight. You'll hear more about as we move on. There are financial, what's called safety schools. These are schools that you'd like to go to school if you could, one, be sure you can get in, but you're also pretty sure you can afford to pay for them. These are very important schools to have on your list. They're also very important schools that you'd be happy with. Oftentimes, many students will put a quote-unquote safety school on their list of financial safety, but not be truly enthusiastic about it. You have to be truly enthusiastic about every school you're going to apply to, because there is a reality that you may end up at one of these schools. So it's very important to understand that. The other thing to understand is the role of need and demonstrate financial need in the application process. Many schools are what's called need blind. That is to say that the institution does not care, does not know what your financial resources are when your application is being reviewed. You're going to be reviewed on the basis of your academic merit, the types of merit that you demonstrate through your application process. That's an ideal world. Many, but not most schools operate under, many but not all schools operate under the premise of being need blind in the admissions process. There are some schools that are what's called need aware. Need aware means that the school will consider some level of financial ability to pay in the admission decision. That is to say, they will determine whether or not to admit a student based on that student's ability to pay the costs. Now, the reality is that a relatively small percentage, that relative percentage will vary from school to school, that employs need-aware admissions will be admitted in that manner. But again, as I mentioned earlier, the best course of action in this process, if you're not sure whether or not a school is need blind or need aware, is simply to ask, and then ask what percentage of students are admitted under a need aware scenario. In many institutions, it only happens toward the end of the process. The underlying challenge here, the underlying reality, is that relatively few institutions have sufficient resources to cover all the demonstrated need exhibited by every admitted student, simply because colleges have limited, finite resources, so they have to manage those resources in a responsible, manageable way. So it's important to be aware of that. Lastly, I'll mention applying for financial aid. And again, if you have any doubt about your family's ability to apply for financial aid, you're strongly encouraged to do so. There are two big forms that the College Admissions utilizes in this regard: the pre-application for federal student aid and this College Scholarship Service profile form. And these are the two main forms that are required. You'll learn more about that in the coming months. But it's very important to be aware of what kind of information these forms address and what they mean. And to that end, all the colleges in the country are required to have what's called a net price calculator. You could fill one out tonight if you wanted to. And the net price calculator can give you a sense at an individual institution about what your financial obligations might be should your son or daughter apply and be admitted and decide to enroll in a particular institution. That can be very helpful planning information now. Don't wait until the middle of your senior year to fill out those net price calculators, because by then you may have made passive opportunities that could be very helpful to you. Again, I just referenced that in passing tonight because your college counselors can help you with that in more detail. So on that note, let me stop. I want to thank you for being here, and I'll pass it on to Craig.
Good evening. How's everyone doing? Cool down. I should mention that Denver actually has 300 sunny days a year, more sunny days than Tampa does. I work for Denver, but I'm actually based here in New Hampshire. I live down the seacoast. I've been coming to Tilton for a number of years. I've been charged tonight to talk to you about early action and early decision, as well as recommendation letters. So I'll jump right into the early action, early decision comments that I have here. Are you all familiar with the differences between early action and early decision? If not, I will explain those to you in a little bit. So right now, over 450 colleges and universities offer some sort of an early action option or an early decision option. Early action is a non-binding admission option where students typically would apply sometime before November 1st, November 15th, and oftentimes find out before the new year. The nice thing about early action is that you get an answer soon and you're not committed to attend if you are admitted. Early decision is a binding option. Right now, just over 200 schools offer an early decision option, and then a third of those schools also offer a second round of early decision, oftentimes called early decision 2. Early decision is great for students that know 100% sure that they only want to go to this one school. And you can only apply to one school early decision. At most schools, the early decision acceptance rate is higher, sometimes significantly higher, than students that might apply through an early action or a regular admission process. To give you some examples of that, so Vanderbilt University, for instance, back in 2016, almost 21% of their students were admitted had they applied early decision, where only 7.3% of the students were admitted if they applied through the regular admission process. And with Emory, 29% of the students that applied through the early decision process were admitted, where only 22% of the students that applied through the regular admission process were admitted. At Denver, we do have an early decision option. We have both early decision 1 and early decision 2. And I can tell you that our acceptance rate for early decision 1 is close to 90%, which is really, really high. And that's compared to closer to 50% for students that apply through the early action or the regular admission process. So there's definitely an advantage to applying early decision at Denver. Some smaller private liberal arts schools oftentimes will bring in as much as half of their class through the early decision process. So again, sometimes advantageous to apply through that early decision option. At Denver, we only bring about 8% of our students through the early decision option. I was on a panel in the fall in the Boston area, and I was on a panel with probably 8 other schools. And I think 7 of those schools brought in at least 40% of their class through early decision. So it's oftentimes a big part of the school's admission process. And oftentimes the schools that offer the early decision options are the smaller private liberal arts and the more competitive schools, if you will. If a student is admitted to a school through the early decision option, they must immediately withdraw all their other applications. And there are some schools where you apply early decision, they don't allow you to apply to other schools at all until you get the decision from them. So you really have to know the rules when you're applying early decision based on the schools that based on the school, I should say, that you're applying early decision to. I know UNH doesn't have early decision, Trinity does, BU does. Tampa, do you have early decision?
We do.
No. So a little more than half of us offer an early decision option here. The only way to opt out of an early decision admittance, so if you're admitted early decision, the only way you cannot come at that particular point in time would be if the finances don't work out. And that's when Rob talked about the net price calculator. With the net price calculator, students should know ahead of time whether or not they will be able to afford that institution before applying, whether it be early action or early decision. I would say that students that need a significant amount of early decision or of financial aid are oftentimes not always good candidates for early decision. And again, a lot of that depends on the school that you're applying to. There are some schools that will meet 100% of demonstrated need. So regardless of your financial need, if you're admitted, they're going to fund you to be able to come. But there are also a good number of schools that don't meet 100% of financial need. So it's important to know where you stand there before making that commitment to applying early decision. Don't apply early decision just because your friends are doing it. Only apply early decision if you know 100% for sure that that's the school that you want to attend and it's your one and only school that you want to attend. When it comes time to the financial aspects of the early decision option, I tell families that keep in mind that the school's assessment of a family's ability to pay is not always in line in terms of what a family is willing to pay. So those are two completely different things. So you need to keep that in mind as well. Again, the net price calculator is really helpful for making those types of decisions. Also been asked to talk about recommendation letters, who you should ask, and how many are recommended or required. And again, it's going to be school specific. Typically, almost every school will require at least a counselor recommendation. So your college counselors here will be one of those folks that write your recommendation. A good number of schools also require at least 1, if not 2, teacher recommendations as well. At Denver, we require the counselor recommendation, but the teacher recommendations are optional. Most students do submit at least 1, sometimes 2 teacher recommendations. A teacher recommendation does not have to be from a current teacher. It could be from a teacher from your sophomore year, it could be a teacher from your freshman year. I always encourage students to consider getting a letter of recommendation from a teacher that taught a class in which you struggled. You know, if you have an A in an English class, we know what that English teacher is going to say about you as a student. We want to see a recommendation from a teacher who you work really closely with, who you might have gone in for extra help with, and really struggled in the classroom and really, came over some hurdles to be successful. in that particular class. So we think that's pretty important. Some students will submit additional recommendations, sometimes from coaches, sometimes from employers, sometimes from alumni. I only recommend students submit these recommendations when we can learn something new about the applicant. So if a coach has something to say about you that hasn't already been said, from your college counselor, from a teacher, then it might be important to include that letter. I only encourage students to use letters of recommendation from alumni if the alumni know you. You'd be surprised at how oftentimes we see letters of recommendation from alumni that don't know the student well enough to be able to write enough about the student to make it helpful within our process. I'd also say that any more than 4 recommendations is probably going to be too much to have in your application. Again, the council recommendation is most likely going to be required at least 1 teacher rec, sometimes 2. If there's a 4th or 5th recommendation, it really does get to be too much. Admittedly, when I read an application, I can read everything in the application. But if I see a 16-page, 20-page application, I'm going to keep pushing it aside and pushing it aside. I'll eventually read it, but it's not going to be one of the first ones that I read. I read an application today, and I was shocked to see a 4.5-page letter of recommendation that was not required. And I read it, and I didn't necessarily learn anything new about the student. So really keep in mind when you're requesting recommendations from folks that the recommendation is going to be useful in the admission process. And make sure that individual knows you well. And I'd also add as a follow-up, make sure you thank the folks that write recommendations for you. A handwritten personal note can go a long way. And keep in mind that an English teacher here at Tilton might have to write 30 to 40 letters of recommendation for folks in the senior class. So thank them for what they do, and keep in mind that everything that is in the application does get read, and I think that's the case for all of us that are here. So have fun with the process, and feel free to ask questions when we're all done here. Thank you.
How's everybody doing today? Awesome. So my name is Courtney, and I am trying to talk a little bit about the academic evaluation. I want to start by sharing who has heard the term holistic before? Anybody? Holistic? No? I promise you by this time next year you'll be very familiar with that term, as it is kind of a buzzword in higher education and admissions right now. Holistic essentially means that many colleges and many universities will review your application by not just looking at one part of your application. There isn't a one-all kind of end-all be-all part of your application. Instead, they're looking at a whole bunch of things in your application to get a better sense of who you are, not just as a student, but who you are as a person and who you are as an individual. In many senses, it's kind of really cheesy to think about, but it's kind of like a puzzle, and each part of your application puts this bigger picture of who you are into context. Just one part of that puzzle, or one part of that context, will be your academic evaluation, and it is going to be a key component no matter where you apply. And I do want to start with a disclaimer that says that it's going to be different at every school. And one thing that's really tough about higher ed and what's tough about college admissions is that term, it depends. And it can get really frustrating to hear that every school is quite different. So not just about your academic evaluation, but about anything. I encourage you to ask. If you're not sure, if you're maybe uneasy, or you just want additional information, that's what representatives from colleges are there for, to answer your questions about that process. So I hope that you do feel encouraged not only to ask us here today, but ask folks at other institutions to provide more additional information. I want to start by saying that the transcript is kind of like the meat and potatoes, usually, of the academic evaluation. So it's kind of like that bigger chunk of the meal where we're going to get a context of who you are as a student, right? We're going to get a better sense of how you're going to perform in the classroom at the institution through your transcripts. Although standardized testing will be very important at certain institutions, I would say that most institutions are really looking at your transcript for what we call trends. And there are different trends that a school really might look at. The first trend is a trend in overall performance. So one thing that's really important to know is most schools will look at all 4 years. So even if you've transferred, you can't really hide those grades from most institutions. They are going to look to see how you're doing 9th through 12th grade. However, how you're performing in your junior and your senior year tends to be a little bit more important because it shows us as an institution how you're going to perform in the classroom. So we really do want to see that not only are you challenging yourself academically, but that you're really pushing yourself in your junior and senior year to show us your best work. The other trend that's really important is a trend in overall rigor and performance. One thing that's really important to note is context, right? We don't compare apples and oranges in admissions. It is pretty close to impossible to compare students from very different institutions when they have different academic courses that are offered, different grading scales, different resources available to those students at those institutions. And so schools are going to try to get a better sense of who you are as a student in the context of your high school. Who here has seen or heard of a high school profile before? School profile? Yeah? It might be causing extra problems for the college counseling office, but sometimes it is important to hear or at least see your school's high school profile, because almost every application that you submit will come with a high school profile. And this gives you a greater context about what's offered in your high school community. Every application that I read comes with a high school profile, so that even if I haven't traveled or I'm not familiar with that school, I have this additional context of what kind of classes are offered, what is your grading scale, how are you performing in the context of your high school. That's all going to be really important. And so when you're traveling to different schools, it's important to see if they are familiar with your school, but also what's on your high school profile, so you know that how you will actually be evaluated in that context.
Courtney? So they each have one in their resource
Oh,
book that they got
wow.
tonight, so I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you.
Now you all have it, you know what it looks like. That is really key. Like I said, I do not read an application, I don't even look at a transcript until I see the high school profile. Usually a high school profile will tell me what type of courses, if your school offers APs or honors, if there are GPAs provided, right? We can't assume anything at an institution. I can't assume that an A shirt tilted is the same thing as an A at a different school, right? So that high school profile really does give us that context, so be familiar with that.
We'll go through that tomorrow, so you don't have to start doing that now.
Great. So the next thing that I really want to share is that, so some students are concerned about their 9th grade grades or their 12th grade grades, and like I mentioned, it really does depend on the institution. I really do encourage you to ask whether or not they weight the GPA. Here, you guys don't have a calculated GPA. And a lot of times students feel like, if my high school doesn't offer this, will this negatively impact me in the application process, right? And the answer is no. It depends on the institution. Some schools will do what they call a recalculated GPA, where they'll say, okay, maybe you're getting A's, B's, you're like an AB student, and they'll recalculate GPA based on their own mathematical equation. Some schools will just give a brief look at your application to see where your grades are falling in the context of your high school. So again, it's really important to get a better sense of what each and every school does, because your GPA evaluation can look very different at one institution versus another institution. The second thing that I've been asked to share with you today is a little bit about influences of diversity in the application process. Like I said before, the application process is really like a puzzle. So there isn't one thing that is really more important or more prevalent in your application than other things. However, there are parts of your application that might make you distinctive or maybe even a more attractive applicant within that certain context of your pool. Just like you are looking for schools that are attractive to you, a lot of different institutions have what we call institutional priorities. They're looking for certain types of students or certain types of students with different interests to bring to their institutions. This can come in different forms of diversity. So for some students or from schools, diversity or institutional priorities might look like geographic diversity. For example, at my institution right now, geographic diversity is having more students from the West Coast or from the South or the Midwest is something that we're really looking for and striving for. For another institution, maybe they just bought or had a new athletic facility and they're really proud and have a lot of investment into their basketball facilities, right? So a student who plays on the basketball team might be someone who might be particularly attractive in that process. So it's important to ask at an institution what their institutional priorities might be so that you have a better sense of where you might fit in or how you can maybe frame your application in the sense that you might be a more attractive applicant within that certain pool. Thank you.
All right, well, hello everyone. Again, my name is Zoe Carter. I work at Boston University and I am the New Hampshire rep within our office. So I get to work with the students from Tilton, which I always really enjoy and I love and wait for the questions that you guys will ask later. I always love the questions. But I'm here tonight to talk a little bit, hopefully just briefly, about the essay component of applying to colleges, which I think for some students might be maybe one of their favorite parts of the application process. For other students, maybe the most anxiety-producing part of the application process, or maybe you're somewhere in between. But I think what's kind of interesting is, in my tenure at BU, I've been there almost 10 years, so I've probably read, close to 20,000 essays, and I will admit that I don't even think I'm really an expert on the essay at this point in my career, because it really is a very subjective thing, right? And I know that Courtney just gave us a really good overview of holistic review and kind of what that means for institutions in higher ed, and the essay is a big part of that. And I know that's a really great thing, because it really means that you do have control in this process. You have this opportunity to put your best foot forward in this personal statement, but it's also kind of nerve-wracking, because you don't really know, like, what are they looking for, what are they expecting, what do they want to read. So I have just a couple of tips and pieces of advice that I can give to you to hopefully make this go a little bit more smoothly for you. First, I guess I just want to talk a little bit about content in terms of your essay. So most of you, of course, are going to be submitting the Common Application, which really gives a pretty broad availability of essay topics. You can essentially say whatever you'd like to say. And so that makes it really challenging, I think, for students, because it doesn't limit you, right? You have to think of this content, what you're actually going to share in 500 words on your own. So when you're thinking about content, I will say, and you'll get different responses to this, but for me, content is actually one of the least important parts of the essay. For me, it's a bit more important in terms of what the actual writing style is, the writing quality, and the voice that's coming through the essay versus what you're actually talking about. And so hopefully, I say that to hopefully give yourself a little bit of a break in terms of knowing that you don't need to have gone on some incredible journey or, found that cure for cancer. You don't have to have had this major life moment to talk about. It's okay to have something rather mundane to write about in your essay, as long as it really sounds like you. And that really leads to my second piece of talking about the essay, which is the voice part of it. I really want it to sound like a 17 or 18-year-old wrote it. I read some essays sometimes where it sounds like someone my age or even older wrote it, and that to me is a bit of a turnoff, because it might lead me to believe that you perhaps had a lot of other input when writing that essay. But thinking again about the content, I always say, if you're having a really challenging time thinking about what to write about, think about the fact that, first of all, we are all human beings that are reading your application. We're not automatons, we're not robots. If you had that opportunity to sit down with that real human being who's reading your application, and you had the opportunity to speak with them for 20 minutes, a half hour, what would you hope that that person would remember about you at the end of your conversation? If you can somehow, encapsulate whatever that thing is into an essay, then I think you're absolutely doing the right thing. The other thing I'd say is, if you can think about what you want to write about, you figure out, okay, I want to write about this specific event that happened to me, or this piece of my personality. Try to write it in at least 2 different ways. Write 2 completely different essays that tackle that one piece of content in 2 very different ways, and then shop it around. See, which approach is really getting you the best kind of response from your reader. Going back to voice again, read it out loud. Once you've gotten to a place where you have an essay that you feel pretty good about, always read it out loud. I think that can again show you whether or not it's truly coming from your voice in a very literal sense, but it also will show you and really point you to any grammatical errors that are occurring within your essay. And then finally, I always say, in terms of making sure that this is your voice, once you have that piece of writing that you're feeling pretty good about, gather with a few friends, maybe 5 or 6 other friends, have your essay printed out without your name on it, throw it into a pile with the other essays, shuffle them about, and pass them out. And see if your friends can automatically, once they read that essay, know that you wrote it. If they can, then again, great. I think you're doing a great job. One note, too, about supplemental essays. So you're going to have your one main essay, your one main personal statement that you're generally going to send off to a number of schools. And then the schools sometimes will have additional short essays that they want you to write. Please write these very carefully. If they're asking you to write these essays, there's a reason for it, and chances are they're really going to scrutinize those essays pretty closely to kind of gather how much involvement and interest you have in actually attending that institution. And that goes for optional essays too. So if the school has some essays where they're like, hey, write it maybe if you want, if you don't want, write those essays. Even if they're optional essays, write the essays. Any opportunity in this process where you can kind of raise your hand and say like, I'm really, really interested in your school, you should absolutely take that opportunity. And I know you've heard this a million times, proofread, proofread, proofread. I'm just going to tell you a very short story that a colleague and I were talking about the other day to kind of illustrate, I think, why proofreading is so important. This is a true story in our office, happened 2 cycles ago now, where we actually reached out to a student because when we looked at his extracurricular involvement, his sort of activities page on the Common application, something was a little bit head-scratching. So he had just written out that he was, in terms of his involvement or his title, that he was an older brother, which isn't unusual. We actually see a lot of students who are kind of writing about their involvement with family responsibilities, taking care of maybe grandparents or younger siblings. But then in the description, it just said, being stupid. And we're like, huh, that's kind of strange. It just didn't seem to really be in line with everything else in his application. And so we actually did take the time to kind of email him and be like, hey, we were just wondering, was there anything more that you wanted to share about this older brother thing besides just being stupid? And he was mortified. And it turned out that he indeed was an older brother to a 10-year-old younger brother. And he just had his laptop out, on the family kitchen table and, walked away for a little bit. And that brother had taken it upon himself to add some color, I guess, to the application. And then the brother was just like, all right, I'm all set, great. And he clicked submit. So I always say, let's just go ahead and make sure, even if you feel like you've read it a million times, before you click that submit button, just go through and read it one last time. Thankfully, everything worked out. He sent us a revised activities list. The younger brother survived, it was fine. But I always say, really, I know you hear that all the time, but you really can never read it enough. Lastly, how important is this in the process? I think it really is a key part of this process, again, because you have so much control. This is your opportunity to actually tell us who you are outside of the academic piece, outside of the numeric things. And as we've discussed, holistic review, this is a vital part of that holistic review process. Will it be the #1 factor in your admission decision at a particular school? Likely not. But I do hope that you do take the care in the next 9 months or so as you're preparing to apply to schools to really put your best foot forward in this part of the application. Thanks.
That's great advice, Zoe. As a dad, I always thought that was the hardest thing to give my kids advice on the essay because it's so personal. And by the way, Zoe, where were you when I needed you, when my kids left college? Again, I'm Brent from University of Tampa, and I think it's my 13th time I've been here along with Rob. So 13 is my lucky number. But I'm going to speak about 3 areas tonight. Number 1, I'm going to speak about the role of the parent in the college admissions process. And then I'm going to speak a little bit about social media, the benefits and pitfalls of social media when you apply to colleges. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up by talking about the resume during the process. And probably the simplest thing, but yet the most important thing of those 3 topics is really the role of the parents. It's just incredible, our generation of parents, and I'm lumping myself in with everybody here, how intrusive we are in this process and how we try to do too much for our sons and daughters. In fact, I'm also over graduate admissions at the University of Tampa, and believe it or not, I have parents call me about their sons and daughters' graduate applications, as shocking as that is. So the best advice I can give you is that the student leads and the parent guides. The parent's there for feedback and reality testing and helping the student, making decisions and good questions. But when it comes to meeting university professionals, remember, this isn't a child's game. This is an adult game, the college admissions process. We're looking for young adults, not children. And if mom and dad are doing all the talking, that's a big problem. And you will really do your son and daughter a disservice by being front and center in the process. And students, you really do need to manage your parents. I have kind of a nutty dad. My dad was a college coach and a little bit nutty, and I still have, he's still alive, thank God, but I still have to manage my father. So remember, students, it's up to you to do that. And specifically what I'm talking about is when you go to college fairs, it's very important that you approach the table and introduce yourself, and your parents should be 2 steps behind. When you show up at a university and go in the college admissions office to announce your arrival, you should walk in there, tell them who you are, and your parents should be behind. Your parents should vet their questions through you. It'll make you look so much better. I was telling some of my colleagues that at the University of Tampa, most of our kids come a long way away to go to the University of Tampa. The number one reason students leave is homesickness. So we always really key in on independence. And I'm sure we're not unlike most universities are looking for independent students. And the best way to show you're independent is to make sure you're running the show front and center when you're speaking with university professionals. Now, when it comes to social media, I think, serves a great role in this era. Almost all universities have some type of, pretty much every social media site has a presence on a university webpage. Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And I find that, and actually research shows that this is a very important part of the student decision-making, not only the information gathering process, but decision-making process. So it's a great thing to do before you visit a university, or maybe when you're thinking about applying. Go on their webpage, and we use something called Gig One that pulls social media from anything out there on the internet that says hashtag Tampa, hashtag UTampa, hashtag University of Tampa. So you can go on there and you can, and again, we're no different than any other university. You can go on there and really see what not only what students are up to, but what faculty are up to, and just in general what the student body is up to. So I find that it gives you a really raw visual look at what's going on at the university. So, and then when you're admitted to a university, you'll usually have a secure admitted student site. And I would encourage you to go on that secure site. Many students find people with similar interests who then, when they arrive the first day on campus, can meet those people and join the same clubs, organizations, maybe even make a new club and organization. I find a lot of people get roommates through the admitted student sites. I think a lot of people avoid roommates through admitted student sites. So again, I think you'll find that valuable, and I would kind of avoid the outside of the university thing. Almost every university, I'm sure University of Tampa has. University of Tampa admitted student class of what is it now, 2023 on Facebook. But again, you don't know if those people are really students, let alone admitted students. So try to use the secure admitted student site. Now the pitfalls of university, a lot of students ask me and parents say, Brent, do you go and look at students' social media before admitting them? Now, again, there's exceptions to every rule, but most universities don't proactively go out and look at admitted student or at student social media sites, namely because of the volume. I mean, we have like 25,000 applications, University of Tampa, so I certainly will not be surfing these websites. However, it's often brought to my attention if somebody does something inappropriate. And I should tell you, those of you who are student athletes, I know Tilton has a lot of student athletes, coaches, our coaches, I know many coaches across the country that say, Brent, before I offer a young lady or young man a scholarship, I like to go on their social media sites and see if their social media presence is consistent with what they've shown me when they've interviewed me. So again, you have to really be smart. Now's the time to clean up your social media, use those privacy settings. Also, I would say, one of my own kids used to always have his voicemail full. And again, you need to make sure you free up that voicemail on your cell phone to speak with people, because it won't make you look very good otherwise. Now, I want to read our social media policy at University of Tampa, because I think it's very similar to what a lot of universities in the 21st century have. And so pay attention to, this is in our course catalog, this is part of what we preach at the University of Tampa. Quote, the University of Tampa takes student postings on social media sites seriously. Students who post illegal behavior or threatening comments on social media sites may have their admission to the university rescinded or may be permanently dismissed from the university. So not only can you have your admissions rescinded, when you're going to school, you can be dismissed for the university for inappropriate social media. And I just want to tell, I think that students now are more savvy and use a little bit more social sense and social skills when it comes to social media than they were like 6 or 7 years ago. And I'll just tell you a story. At the University of Tampa, I had to rescind admission for about 8 students one time because, believe it or not, on our admitted student website, there were about 40 or 50 students talking about fake IDs, and which are felonies in most, it's a felony in most states, it certainly is in Florida. But we had 8 students that said, in a nutshell, this is where I got my fake ID, this is where you can get your fake ID, this is how effective my fake ID was. So basically, this is how I committed my felony, this is how you can commit your felony. So needless to say, we rescinded admission for those 8 students. And of the students, all these students in this conversation, there were about 4 of them who came close, but not, we decided to not rescind admission, but our dean of students requested that they have a meeting with her their first week on campus. Now that's not how you want to start your college career, you want to meet the dean of students because you're president of the class or something, not because of a disciplinary issue. So again, just be smart about it, and again, make sure you pay attention to your privacy settings and the like. And finally, I'd like to talk about the resume. I would say, at least at Tampa, and it's probably true nationwide, about 75% of the students who apply submit some type of a resume. And the nice thing about submitting a resume, you're going to find out when you fill out the Common App or the Coalition App or many of these university applications that the little boxes for your extracurricular activities or community service and the like don't really allow you enough space, enough area for you to really paint a picture of you. Whereas a resume, to me, that's what a resume is all about. It paints a picture of you. And so I think it would be very appropriate to write a resume, and then you're going to build on that when you're in college. And those of you who are student athletes, it's very important to have an athletic resume, in my opinion. That's one of the, I think, 4 or 5 things in your toolkit you need as you're going through the recruiting process. And you can embed your athletic activities in the resume. Now, keep in mind in a resume, what I'm looking for, and again, what most universities look for, leadership issues and accomplishment. Remember, participation is fine, but universities are really looking for what separates the participants from those who participate and accomplish something. So, there's the whole issue of depth, too. Again, all other things being equal, it's nice to have a lot of depth. In other words, I'd rather see somebody who played tennis for 4 years at Tilton School and was on the cross-country team for 4 years, or something like that, versus 1 year of tennis, 1 year of cross-country, 1 year of basketball. And now again, there's exceptions to every rule, and I'm not saying you shouldn't put one-time events, because I think they can be very important. But again, depth is something to consider when you're writing a resume in that regard. And but again, community service is huge for universities, leadership, and then accomplishment, and showing some breadth. And remember, those of you who are student athletes, not only, especially if you're looking at elite universities, not only athletics and academics, but anything that's related to the arts, like theater, music, musical theater, art, things like that. It can really show well-roundedness. So these are some things to think about, and I think I'll turn it over to Mrs. Partridge and wrap it up tonight.
At this point in the evening, we would take some questions about any of the components that we spoke about, any of the application process. Anything that wasn't clear? Yes, please.
So your deed-based discussion about the early decision and the acceptance if you don't have to transfer. That exception, does the school be alternatively used based on the input of the parents? They have their own calculation of what we can afford. If the parents decide that they don't want to pay that, is that counted as an exception to the early decision? Or are you bound by the school's calculation of what that looks like?
Okay, did everybody hear the question? It was about the early decision process and a family that might not be able to make the finances work after the student has been admitted. So at Tilton School, what we do is we encourage parents and students to do that calculator early on and to get an early read in the financial aid process from the particular college. So that means FAFSA information is filed and lots of times the CSS profile, that second form that you heard about, so that we don't get into that kind of situation. So there's a pre-read on the financial piece, and the family has investigated that in advance. And I think, I don't want to speak for everyone here, but I did hear tonight that if finances are a big concern, that you may not want to apply early decision to an institution because you might want the opportunity to compare financial aid packages. So you might want to do regular admission or early action and have a chance to compare those, which you're removing yourself from that opportunity if you do the ED. But again, there's that opportunity to do an early pre-read. Is that agreed upon? Is there anything that anybody would like to add to that? Zoe?
To directly answer your question, like if when you're signing the early decision agreement and it has that clause saying like, oh, if I'm unable to pay, I can walk away. There's not, at least in our situation, there's not a specific monetary amount or what the expected family contribution is versus what we offer that would equate to that. So if a family says we cannot afford this, they can walk away. There's no sort of magic other calculation that goes into that. But I think all the pieces that she gave are really, really important to think about as well.
Anything else? All right, well, one more round of applause. I have a couple of announcements, and then we're going to move down to the tables. The representatives are going to move to the tables, and you can ask particular questions about an individual university. You can come right up and ask your own questions. I just want to remind students. Yeah, thanks. I just want to remind students that you need to bring your resource book with you tomorrow because we're going to refer to those things like the profile and other particular pieces that we've included in the resource book. So bring them with you tomorrow morning. And we are going to see you back here at 8:20 a.m. And the big piece of news, right, is that you don't have to be in classroom dress. It is a clapping moment. So some teams have to leave a little close to the lunch period tomorrow, so you might have, your coach may have asked you to dress in your athletic gear. That's fine. Just no ripped jeans and no pajama pants, but it doesn't have to be in classroom dress. So please join in at the tables.
You're good to go. You can speak to anybody? Yeah. Picture of one of the dorms.
House community. What's their biggest round?
Hey, buddy, how are you? How you been? How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. Have you missed you so much? Oh, yeah. How you been?
Great to see you.
Good to see you. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Hi, Jimmy.
Are you looking forward to the college process?
From Boston University.
Oh, nice.
I'm trying to apply to school.
Oh, you want to go up there and talk to him?
I want you to meet my mom. She knows Marino.
I'm Miss Bouchard. Go, Russ. Russ.
I don't know what to ask.
No, with two, so,
So our we're which is Billy, we got him when he was 14 months. And then my niece is daughter is from so my niece is Chinese, and I'm looking for a good picture of her, which I don't think I have right at the moment, but she's a sophomore at Skidmore now, playing steel hockey and heading to Dartmouth for chemical engineering. I know, he's crazy good. Oh, you're adorable. Yeah, that's and that'd be interesting if she ends up coming here. It's so interesting how different they are, and
No, we're gonna practice. You can vote, Jay. That's the most exciting part.
yeah, Amelia. Aaron, she's on That's very cool. Small world. And then we went back and got his brother. We just got very lucky.
so a friend of mine,
Your child and my child actually started. They just at the front. They just got to the front. I'm just like. Okay, for tomorrow.
You have to, there's 10 different schools you're applying to. Billy, you didn't even get the other package. You didn't get the one about spider. Oh, I did. I think so too. Yeah. So I'm not going to go over the stats. What is that? That's heavy. Yeah, we should watch the party.